refuse to extradite criminals that are criminals in the United States, especially if the crime was murder, simply because America has still a death penalty on the books. And so these countries, for example, don't want to send this person back to the United States to receive the death penalty, even though, for the most part, he's probably going to spend the rest of his life on death row. But the fact that we have it, that several states have death penalties in place, actually causes other nations to not extradite people who have fled the United States. Okay? And so the Founding Fathers, again, they wanted to minimize the conflict. They wanted to give states, or they wanted to, states were going to retain some level of their sovereignty, but they also were giving up some level of that sovereignty in order that they might all play nice with each other. Okay? The one thing that was kind of a sticking point was the fugitive slave section. And so one of the areas that they made an exception was that under common law and under the laws that were in place at the time of the Constitution, if a slave fled one of the states in the South and made it to one of the states in the North, he was considered free. And the Southern states said, we're not going to agree to that. And so basically this clause was inserted on purpose as a compromise. And I think it's a great illustration of people setting aside something in the short term to achieve a compromise to make it work. We don't necessarily have to like the compromise. I'm sure the northern representatives didn't like this compromise, but they acceded to it because without it, they wouldn't have had any of the southern states even on board. Okay? And the founders believed that they needed to have at least a vast majority, which is when we get to the ratification section, we'll see what they said about how it was going to be ratified. But they believed that it wasn't going to work if only 2 or 3 states signed up. So they were doing everything possible to try and make it possible for all the states to buy in. Okay? So that was one of the clauses, and we'll see another one in a minute, that they put in as a compromise to the slaveholding states at the time. Yes, Jeff?
On extradition, is that, what determines what issues you can be extradited for? In other words, like recently we had this runaway senators in Wisconsin. I mean, is it because they were not committing a, quote, crime?
Yeah, they didn't, as far as we know, they didn't commit a crime just by not showing up.
Okay, so are all crimes, do all crimes have extradition basically attached to them?
You have to ask.
Between states?
I think it's generally done by statute or agreement between states. So they're interstate compacts, for example, that govern things like this, where a bunch of states will get together and say, okay, here's some common rules that we're all gonna play by.
Are there things that you can commit a crime in one state and run to another and get away?
That's not something I'd have right on the top of my head.
I mean, I haven't heard one. I just wondered.
Well, it used to be that you could bootleg in one state and run to another state.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't have to tackle this if this doesn't fit here, but on the fugitive slave thing, we do have the Deuteronomy 23 thing where it says, "You shall not hand over to his master a slave who has escaped from his master to you. He shall live in your midst in the place he shall choose in one of your towns where it pleases him, and you shall not mistreat him." But then you have the thing, if you had indentured servitude, rack up a debt, get put into indentured servitude, and go work for somebody else.
Yeah.
How do you balance those, or have you ever done any study on that?
No.
Anything? Okay, that's
No,
all right.
haven't done that.
Is that referring to a Israeli slave or a foreign slave? I seem to have it in the back of my head that that was referring to a foreign slave, and you weren't supposed to send the foreigners back who wanted to escape to Israel. But I'm not sure that, because I didn't think that the Jews were supposed to have slaves. They were supposed to not enslave their brothers.
Well, they didn't have permanent slavery, right?
Right.
Slaves had to be set free, and there's a debate about whether it was after the year of Jubilee or after the sabbatical year. Some people have different interpretations of what the sabbatical year release meant. We don't have time to go into that here today, but it's an interesting area for study. So, any other questions about Article 4, Section 2. All right, Article 4, Sections 3 and 4 talk about how do we get new states. And I didn't know this before I was studying for this, that first of all, they did allow for states to divide. However, in order for that to happen, Congress had to consent to it, and there were in fact 3 states that were admitted to the Union early on that were the result of dividing states. Okay? And I didn't know this, but Tennessee was broken off. I mean, if you look at a map, this looks reasonable, right? The Tennessee was broken off the western part of North Carolina. Kentucky was broken off from Virginia. And Maine was, interestingly, even though it wasn't contiguous with Massachusetts, and even though it wasn't originally part of Massachusetts colony, there was a history there whereby Maine became a part of Massachusetts late in the 1600s. And so Maine enters as a part of something called the Missouri Compromise. Okay? Everybody remember that from their history? What was the Missouri Compromise?
Seems like something about slavery.
Yeah. It's whereby Missouri got to enter the Union as a slave state, and Maine entered as a free state. And the whole point of it was to maintain the balance of power, especially in the Senate, between slave and free states. Okay? So that's how we got those 3 states. The rest were all by addition. Again, required the consent of Congress, and Congress would usually pass a law saying, here's how you become a state. The Northwest Ordinance of, I think it's 1789, primarily was concerned, in those days, the Northwest Territories were Ohio, Illinois, and Michigan, and not the Northwest we know of today. But that was the Northwest Territories that the Northwest Ordinance of 1789 covered, and that's an interesting document. In fact, is that in here? I didn't notice if that was in
I
here.
believe
or
it
not.
is.
Yeah.
Get the president and just say, I want West Virginia?
I don't remember exactly how West Virginia broke off over the issue or during the Civil War, and how the boundary got demarcated. I don't remember how that happened.
Redistricting.
Yeah, on a major scale. The other thing that this talks about in this section is the fact that there were territories which were not states, which were owned by the federal government, and those were to be governed then by Congress, not by neighboring states. The last part that's covered in Section 4 is the point that if a state were invaded, all the other states basically obligated themselves at a national level to come to their aid. And that included both in the case of invasion or in the case of internal insurrection. Okay. So the rest of the states basically agreed, if there's civic unrest or if there's an invasion into your state, we're all going to come and help out. Okay.
Is that what they mean by domestic violence?
Yes. Yeah. Remember that in the context here, they're remembering something called Shays' Rebellion. And that scared the pants off of them. And so that's kind of how this got, one of the reasons that this got put in here. Shays' Rebellion, Whiskey Rebellion had been going on just recently. So, all right, so Article 4, Section 4.